All right, now joining me is Connor Jansen and Ben Honeycutt of the Open World Project. Guys, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you, Don. It's so great to have the opportunity to be joining you today.
Yeah, we're really honored. As we were just talking about a little bit, it took a little while to set up, but we're really happy to be here and really excited to be on your podcast since I think it's making a lot of waves. I've been seeing what you've been posting about it, and it seems like you're really getting involved with some powerful and significant people in the field of education. So we're kind of happy to be in the same sphere as that.
Yeah, and what I enjoy is that I had a chance to talk with you guys at the like the mind meld part of it. I mean, you guys were kind of brainstorming about it years ago when I first met you both. And well, heck, before I get a hold of myself, first of all, introduce yourselves and then, give us a little taste of what you're doing there with Open World.
Sounds good. So beyond the regular introduction, again, I'm Connor Jansen. I am an architectural designer. I also am the co-founder of the Open World Cause, and I'm also sort of a web developer. I do those things on the side, and all of those things have this really nice sort of combination. Luckily, I get to do a share of all of them in Open World, and yeah, it's come a long way since we last talked. Ben, maybe if you want to do your intro, and then you can sort of launch into what we've done since maybe well, I guess. Should we give a brief overview, or how do you want to do that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll get started here. My name is
that'll help.
Ben Honeycutt. I was never really a good student ever. I was never great at the game of school, I guess. And
you've got a lot in common with all of my other guests.
Yeah, that's I don't know. I was kind of alienated by school when I was a senior, but then I had a teacher challenge our whole senior class to create a legacy. So Open World started as the Open World Project, where we raised money to collect 2 laptops and internet access for a school out in Nepal. And I think 6 years later, we're now a nonprofit that has helped construct a school in Nepal, in an indigenous region in Nepal. And we're working to construct a school in Kenya, or at least provide the funding for that, as well as providing clean water and hoping to help others find educational opportunities around the world. So,
and I guess where we fit in to the show today is that this all got started for us when we were in high school. We're both 24 years old now. So we even recently, myself just this past year and a year ago, both finished college. And so we're not really classified as students anymore, but we keep getting involvement from students at levels that are really impressive to us, and even levels beyond what we were doing when the project originally started. So we're constantly amazed at what people are doing with these ideas when we just pretty much bring them to the doorstep and they bring them inside and sort of just run with them at that point.
Yeah,
so
and I think
we have a lot of great people involved now.
And I think that's what's so exciting there is that now I'm a teacher. These experiences really inspired me to become a teacher. And now what I try to do as a teacher is try to give my students these opportunities. I teach out at Monument, Colorado at Monument Academy, and I'm the technology teacher. And what I love about Monument is they've given me the creative freedom as a teacher to really kind of make it, I would say it's sort of a pseudo entrepreneurship class where kids use technology to find creative solutions to challenges, whether it be in their local community or around the globe. And so being a teacher now, I feel like has given me the opportunity to at least try to pay it forward to my students today. And it's been amazing to see the results so far.
That's awesome. So one of the things we try to do, on our new segment, Young Entrepreneur Spotlight, is kind of go through the growing process. And one thing I heard, well, first of all, one thing I kind of dig is that you guys are both entrepreneurs. You guys have other things, but this has been your baby now for quite a while.
That's right,
Take me through that process of making this a class project and growing it over the last several years.
Absolutely. So when it got started, I was about to turn 18, and I think the thing that really struck me the most is that almost a year before I had gotten my first job finally. And when I went to my interview, I didn't really have much of a resume at that time, but so I really highlighted the fact that I have a pretty good GPA, and I've done really well in debate and forensics. And it doesn't take away from the things that I learned in those programs, but I was kind of stunned by how little my bosses cared at the restaurant that I applied to. And it made me really reevaluate what I wanted to get out of school as a student. And so when I was challenged to create this legacy, or to create a legacy, that really hit home, and it made me really want to do something in the quote unquote real world as a senior. And so I went to my dad, Kevin Honeycutt, to see if he had any ideas. And my dad's the type of guy who will always have 3 ideas at all times about what legacy to start. So he was thrilled I was finally coming to him. And what my dad told me is that he knew a teacher out in Nepal named Govinda Panthi who needed support. They weren't able to physically send care packages to him because of Nepal's tariffs and the laws in that country. And my dad basically gave me the contact information and said, figure out a way to help. And so what we did as a high school project, we had, I think, a chicken noodle soup day. We collected
we did
tickets.
all kinds of small fundraisers, and we even what I would label as one of Ben and I's most legendary arguments. We've been friends since we were just about 4 years old, and so we ended up getting involved in this project together. And one of the biggest conflicts we ever had was that we gotten a very, very tense fight about whether or not high school students should wear full suits or should support their cause by wearing the t-shirts that they had made. And so I was on the t-shirt side, Ben was on the we must wear suits side, and we had this huge clash. And so it was kind of funny because we were both we were barely 18 at that time, and I think just that's a small anecdote of beginning to be able to navigate the small yet impactful relationship sort of dynamics that expose themselves when you start working on something really seriously. And I think this is something that we caught on to really quickly. We were fortunate enough to catch on to that quickly, but the other part of it was that we started to care immensely about how we were projecting ourselves after some of those events had occurred. And going into the summer after this whole project had started, we were still really naive, but we had a very serious perspective about how to approach things.
Well, yeah, and I think, well, for one, I was totally right on that argument, by the way, on the suits versus t-shirts argument. But I think, that was
okay, did you embroider did you have some sort of logo or branding on your suit?
Not on the suit, but on the
Connor, run with this.
Oh, yeah. It's funny now that I look at it, because I would actually, if I could talk to past Ben, tell him that I think t-shirts were the way to go, because and the reason is that, I think this was the first time we actually had to evaluate how we were projecting ourselves in a professional capacity. And it's
branding, baby. Yeah, branding. Absolutely.
Totally. So branding, Connor had the right move.
Well, I mean, see, the reason I don't get intensely angry about it anymore, even though 18-year-old Connor had a lot to say, I can see both sides of the argument. Ben wanted to look really professional. I was just thinking about the image, and for as 18-year-olds, it's hard to coalesce those issues into one solution. You just often continue to fight for the thing that you think should be. So it's kind of funny looking back on it.
And now it's funny, because now when I talk to 18-year-olds, that's exactly what I say, is that you are in a curious position, because you hear the stereotypes all the time about Gen Y, Gen X, millennials. There's a lot of terms where it's like, self-entitled, it's the iPhone generation, the me generation, that sort of thing. And so what I talk about to my kids is that if you're able to show that you are passionate, and also, if you are wearing t-shirts, and I also talk about, my kids really, whenever they're making a video to promote their cause, it's almost like they always have this inherent temptation to be Spielberg. And I said, there is a huge benefit, and Connor and I learned this in high school, to actually playing up the fact that, you're not using $1,500 equipment, you're using your cell phone.
You're making something happen with limited resources, but you're still just as passionate, and you're still just as gung-ho about getting out there and making sure that people hear your voice or see the thing that you're trying to, make seen. And I think those are just really powerful elements of what made this meaningful. I would even say, for the first 3 years of the organization, from us being 17 to about 20 years old, we went through both exploring this as some high school sort of potential project, all the way to sort of realizing that we had a real opportunity to make an impact and to continue to make seen the issue that we were passionate about. And so, you know, that really continued for a while.
I think a critical moment though for us was right after high school. We kind of just thought we were done with the project, because you get into that August to May mindset, where, you know, once you've hit the summer, it's over. You cut the ribbon on the year, and you kind of move on to the next year. And so I don't think either of us had much intention to continue this when we went to college, but we got an email from Govinda, who told us that monsoon season was particularly rough for Nepal that year, and it wiped out 2 of their classrooms. And we kind of sat and talked to each other, and we were, you know, we kind of came to the conclusion that laptops are cool and everything, but how cool are laptops going to be for these students if these students don't have a school to go to? And so that was kind of the initial spark that inspired us to actually move this on to the university level. And we moved, and so after that, we continued to support the school. We were still kind of trying to find what our identity was, what this meant. I mean, was this sort of a side project, or was this actually going to be an ambitious NGO that solved real world and, you know, pretty substantial structural problems, or at least tried to solve them around the world? And it's just, I think, you know, by the time, you know, we sort of, our 4th year of college, we finally moved and established a nonprofit, and we did a campaign to build a new school in Nepal and an indigenous community. And I think by the time we sat back and we realized what we had become, that we had become a serious nonprofit organization, you know, we did it without really thinking about it.
Well, by that time, we had worked with 3 other international organizations. That school wasn't our doing alone. We just helped with the process of it. But what was amazing about that, and why I think it's important that we draw that delineation, is that working with those international organizations not only gave us contacts with people in Nepal and Kenya, but people in Belgium, people in other parts of the world, parts of the UK, Global Classroom Project, people in Australia now, all kinds of people who we have had the opportunity to work with, who had a similar sort of goal in mind about projecting and making important the issues of the world, not just the issues of a single country or the issues of a locality. While those are important things as well, we really latched onto that idea, and I think that even brought us out of our infancy a little bit, because we started asking more important questions, like, what is the role of a nonprofit from the United States in another country? Who are the people who have done work like this before, and what are the issues that we don't want to, or maybe some of the problems that we wouldn't want to recreate as an outside organization? So we started to just really look critically at ourselves, and that was a huge turning point as well.
And, so speaking of that, I always want to have people evaluate, when was your rock bottom? Like everybody I've talked to, their journey always hit a critical point where it was like, okay, is it over, or what are we gonna do? What was that?
That was totally Steve Hargadon. Yeah. So there was actually we had to evaluate. So we have this conversation. We have a Skype call with Steve Hargadon actually when we were a freshman in college, and that was probably the watershed moment in what our nonprofit is today, because we kind of thought, I think, you're 18 and you hear it enough from people, oh my goodness, I don't know any other 18-year-olds who are doing this. That's so amazing. And so we kind of got a little bit of an ego, and I think a pretty big head about what we were doing. Well, Steve, one of his daughters had actually lived in Nepal for years, had done really incredible on-the-ground work in Nepal for a long time. And so we end up getting into a conversation with someone who is, I don't know if he'd consider himself an expert, but at that time,
at least well-informed about some of the structural issues that we weren't aware of yet.
And so we had this conversation, and he kind of asked about what our goal is. Well, he said, what are your long-term objectives? And we were like, well, we brought 2 laptops and internet access to a school. And we're kind of, have these dopey smiles on our face. And he's like, so what are you doing to make sure that your organization doesn't fall into the critical missteps of the tech dumping phenomenon that so many American, U.S., quote unquote Western.
Oh, I love that he called it a tech dumping phenomenon.
Yeah. And we just kind of look at each other and we're like, well, we did provide 2 laptops and internet. Like we didn't have anything.
We got really repetitive, and what the core of that issue was not so much about, well, it was a large part about the act of tech dumping and leaving technology behind that wasn't usable, or the instruction wasn't there, a bevy of issues that came with that, but also the issues that came with Western organizations working in countries and not preparing the individuals they had worked with for their realistic work opportunities. And so there's this whole, what Steve told us about further was this whole lost generation of Nepali students in particular who were unable to take advantage of most of what those Western organizations had provided to them because they didn't apply to the workforce there, and they didn't apply to the economic or socioeconomic values that had been established by previous generations and would eventually get them jobs. In fact, most of those students had to leave the country to seek jobs in other developed nations, and the weird part about that is that you know, inadvertently you commit brain drain and you deplete a country that's already struggling economically of some of its best and brightest, and that's just a really interesting dichotomy that we had never even thought about,
never considered. And you know, I think at the end of the conversation, you know, Steve challenged us. You know, he said, you know, we have an incredible responsibility if we're going to commit to this work. You know, are you truly committed to actually helping people that are in, you know, developing communities? And, you know, he really kind of showed us really the magnitude of the work that we were wanting to do. And I remember we kind of sat back for a while. I mean, it felt like, I remember I was just kind of stunned, but I don't think there was a more important conversation that we've ever had.
Both the most humbling and energizing sort of conversation.
Incredibly necessary. And I think it's what was the stepping stone. So we ended up finding, a couple of years later, we got connected to Dr. Eric Hartman, who was actually at Kansas State University at that time, who has, he published the Fair Trade Learning Standards with, oh man, I cannot remember their names, a couple of other professors. I would happily find that link again. But basically, it's a challenge to international organizations to make sure that, you know, you see this phenomenon right now of so many colleges, so many NGOs, so many nonprofits here in the United States who basically send these unskilled volunteers to countries all around the world, and they're there for a week, they take their selfie, and then, you know, they leave. And that's something that, you know, I remember I kind of looked, Dr. Eric Hartman had a lot of conversations with me, and the first thing I did is I looked at all my pictures on my profile, and I was like, oh my gosh, am I doing this? And what he talked about is like, no, you know, what are your long-term objectives? You know, he challenged us again to make sure that what we were doing in these communities would have long-term benefits for the communities that we were working with. Yeah,
that's awesome. I tell you, it's just, you know, in some ways, first of all, you guys found those kind of mentors to give you the honest answers. I've got a friend, and actually kind of a former student, who I'm sure will probably be on the show soon, but it was the same thing. Like, he had already been told, don't go there for a photo op.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like, go there to make a difference. And Pete did just that because he kind of was armed with that information ahead of time. And I just like that, you know, somebody was honest and fair with you and saying, hey, look, cool, good on you. But, you know, I've seen plenty of cases where I don't want to say made things worse, but, you know, and sometimes, in some cases, people have made things worse. So I think that's just so cool that you got that kind of honest advice and then work past it. You know, you didn't take it too personally, and you guys have kind of pushed past it. The other thing I will say, or actually I should say the next question is, you know, now that you guys have, you know, kind of gone through your first journey, you know, from classroom to, you know, you went through that whole hero's journey. But as every hero's journey, you've hit the 12 o'clock hour, so to speak, and there's a new journey coming up. So what is that new journey? How are you guys going to grow? What's next?
Well, we were really lucky. This is a really nice segue, because we were really lucky that those individuals spoke so honestly with us, because that occurred right before we traveled to Nepal, and informed a lot of what our strategy would be on the ground. And then again, it informed how we would approach our recent trip on the ground in Kenya. And I think part of that next step for us has ultimately been figuring out how to stay consistent and actionable within the goals that we set when we do field work, because we're getting to a point now where we're doing so much analysis about water availability, health and nutrition evaluations, and ultimately the longevity of the schools that we're partnered with, that as now an organization who is sort of recognized by the federal government, but also regulated in that way, we have to be very discerning about the things that we commit to. And so I think over the last year, we've just done a lot of work to make sure that not only is the work meaningful, but are the communities actually benefiting, and how can we continue to sort of re-envision those aspects. So the future, in large part for the journey, I suppose, is mostly about continuing to be very self-critical and delivering the type of analysis that will push the organization into new territories. That's kind of a vague way of speaking about it, but without getting into all of the ins and outs of each of those trips and the data sets, I think that's one way of summarizing it, because I think we're really passionate now, not only about the work itself, but how the work is presented and what we can do to help other organizations do good work as well.
And I think that last point is exactly kind of where I am at. One thing I feel is, when I first started at KU, the University of Kansas, I really felt alienated at first because I didn't know college was not at all what I expected. And I didn't really know what I was getting out of college. And I think one of the things I feel quite thankful for is that the amount of just sheer social capital that students have at their disposal in a university setting, I feel really benefited by, because one thing that stuck with me now that I'm becoming a teacher, for the longest time, it felt like there would be a natural transition for me as a teacher, so I could introduce a lot of what we've done through Open World into my classroom, but I really struggled with that at first. And one of my professors actually referred me to Dr. Gershenfeld, who wrote a book called Fab. And he talked about how in our classrooms, we have the ability to help inspire laboratories of learning. And there was something in there about just opening the door of opportunity for students. And I realized, I had been working on creating like these 7 to 10 page lesson plans where I try to, create this spark for my students. And what I realized is that I was working so hard at this that I was almost creating the spark myself. And that in itself, in my opinion, I'm robbing that experience of my students if I do that. And so now, the second part of this journey, I think, is that now, I look at it, today I think students can change the world for other people from the device that's in their pocket. But how can you do that in a way, and be sure that you're helping other people? And so what Connor and I are trying to do is trying to provide a roadmap, and I'm doing that through my classroom, starting legacy projects in my classroom, challenging students and giving them a challenge, and that's the thing, is that I'll have students, they'll ask, well, do you think the principal would approve us putting up posters around the school? And I'll be like, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. It's tough to reach the principal these days. And they'll always get really mad at Mr. Honeycutt about that. But then later that day, they'll schedule a meeting with the principal themselves. They'll ask themselves. And I think providing others that opportunity, but really just opening the door for others to create projects and initiatives ourselves, is kind of what we hope to do.
Kind of like the same way the individuals who are willing to be honest and blunt with us about our work, we not only want to be honest and blunt about the work, but we want to make sure that kids know that they can do these things, and they can do them earlier than we did even. We've worked with so many classrooms domestically now who have partnered and created these cultural exchanges, and not just from those cultural exchanges do students gain knowledge about another part of the world, but they start using really real world type strategies and thinking. In fact, we had one classroom in particular where the first question they asked is, how are kids getting to and from school each day, and what is the infrastructure like? Is it supporting a busing system? Is it supporting public transportation in some other way? And so they just started asking important questions at the beginning, and these were 5th graders. Like, it can happen at any age, and it can happen in the most profound ways that we probably haven't even encountered yet. And so just continuing to encounter those things and empower students even though I'm not a teacher and I don't get to interface with that every single day, like Ben does, I see what Ben does. I see what the organization has been able to do for students, and especially when we do field work in particular, the fact that we aim at least to do meaningful work in and of itself just shows me that anyone can do this who has the passion to pursue meaningful and valuable experiences that affect other people. And I don't think there's anything more admirable or noble in this world right now as there is to become a more global and more conscientious population. So
Yeah.
I don't know, that's a long answer between the both of us, but I think that even only scratches the surface, because so much of this is about making sure that we can recreate these experiences that we've had for other people in turn.
That's awesome. No, I really appreciate it. I see what you guys have done, having known you guys for a number of years. It's been, I hate to say the word neat, but it's fulfilling. How about that? I love to see your guys' passion, and I love to hear the transparency, and, you know, it's been the journey for sure. You guys have started off in one level, you know, had some lessons along the way and continue to scale up. And as you guys are both kind of being entrepreneurs, it's just kind of fun to hear that journey for sure. All right, wrap it up. Where can we find you? Where can we find more information about Open World?
So we're on the standard social media. We have an Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Easy to find by just searching for Open World Cause. And our website is openworldcause.org. We feature a bunch of our projects there. We feature some of our past initiatives, and even Ben wrote this awesome narrative that's sort of a perspectival view from basically a storytelling sort of perspective of the entire story of the organization. So we hope it's not too boring to read.
Yeah,
that was kind of the goal there, is to make it more engaging. And all of that's on the website. Again, some of our past projects. That's about it as far as I can think. I mean, we're always really willing to connect with people.
Always.
My most common internet handle is CJAN, CJAN, Z as in zebra. And Ben, what do you go by these days? Just
Ben A. Honeycutt.
Yeah.
Normally, yeah. Now that I've rebranded, now that I'm in the classroom now, so
beyond some of the teenager usernames that we had for a while, but
I thought Ben had to get rid of Sassy Girl 15. I thought that was just totally inappropriate.
Heartbreaking.
No, that's awesome, guys. Congratulations on everything. As you guys continue to grow and continue to share what you do, I'm hoping people will listen to this podcast and check out Open World and connect with you guys. And man, if you guys are ever interested, and I'm saying this to my audience, if you guys are ever interested in like wanting to do some NGO work, contact these guys. Their learning curve has obviously been tested.
It would be a dream come true.
I couldn't think of a better send-off. That's really great to hear from you, Don. And also it excites me because I think that we've already had the pleasure of working with so many amazing people, not only in education, but outside of it too. And just seeking more of those opportunities in general is something we're doing all the time.
Today, you know, we have the tools. You know, it's tough. You know, we ran into those pitfalls ourselves about actually asking ourselves whether or not we were truly helping, you know, people who, you know, were trying, you know, people in education or people in communities around the world. And, you know, what our dream is to help give people a roadmap so they can make a real difference and help serve others and help others find opportunities around the world. And it'd be a dream come true to make new connections along that line. So,
and hopefully to make some of these things that we encountered that were hard lessons more accessible and at least you know, easier to retrieve the correct resources for when you
and let people build off them. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're happy to be a part of this today, is just as happy as we are to be involved with everything else. So thank you so much, Don. It's been a pleasure to join the podcast today.
All right, there we go. Ben Honeycutt, Connor Jansen, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.